An unexpected visit stirred up secrets I thought were long buried, shattering the familiar calm of my life. I had just settled in with my morning coffee, savoring the quiet, when a knock at the door broke the silence. It was my nephew. Of all people. A face I hadn't seen in years. There he stood, with that easy grin and that familiar spark in his eye, but something was different. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Hey, uncle," he said, his voice tinged with a mischievous tone, like he knew a secret I didn't. "Got time for some company?" We hadn't spent much time together over the years. Life kept us busy. But something about his visit felt odd. My wife was out of town, so the timing was strange, if not convenient. Still, I invited him in. He settled onto the couch with a comfort that only comes from family. Yet, his energy brought a charge to the room, an unpredictable tension that had me on edge. We caught up with the usual pleasantries at first: work, life. But he quickly veered into stories from his travels, weaving tales with a flair I'd never seen before. He painted pictures of places I could only imagine. He spoke in a way that pulled me in, even if half of it sounded exaggerated. "But that's not even the best part," he teased, eyes glinting. "You wouldn't believe what happened next." I leaned in, captivated. The story he spun had me laughing, my eyes wide with surprise. Time seemed to blur as we fell into an effortless rhythm. His stories, his laughter, even his expressions, it felt like a world away from my usual life. I almost forgot where I was. He suddenly looked around, taking in the space as if seeing it for the first time. His gaze settled on an old photograph on the mantel, one I hadn't looked at in years. "You kept it," he murmured, his tone softening. I glanced at the picture. It was from a family trip years ago, back when he was just a kid. A memory of happier times. "Of course I did," I replied, feeling a pang of nostalgia. For a moment. He seemed lost in thought. Then he turned to me with that same mischievous grin. "Do you ever miss the old days, uncle?" The question took me by surprise. There was something in his tone, a hint of something deeper. "Sometimes," I admitted. "But life moves on, doesn't it?" "True," he agreed, though he looked at me with an intensity that felt almost like a challenge. "But not always." I tried to brush it off with a laugh, but his gaze lingered. I felt my pulse quicken, an odd thrill I couldn't explain. He had a way of making everything feel like a dare, like he was pulling me into a game where I didn't know the rules. And somehow, I couldn't resist playing along. As the afternoon wore on, he talked me into letting loose a bit. He pulled out a bottle of something stronger than coffee, and before I knew it, we were laughing like old friends, the hours slipping away. The stories grew bolder. There was a sense of freedom that had been missing from my life for longer than I cared to admit. He'd always been a free spirit, but now he seemed even more so. As if life had only fueled his fire. I listened, caught up in his stories, wondering when I'd become so tame, so predictable. Part of me envied him. The part of me that once had dreams of my own, before life took over. Finally, he stood up, stretching and looking out the window as the sun began to set. "You know, uncle," he said thoughtfully, "sometimes you've got to live a little. Take risks." I chuckled, unsure if he was hinting at something specific. "Is that right? And what kind of risks are we talking about?" "Oh, you know," he shrugged, but his smile was unmistakably playful. "The kind that reminds you you're alive." Before I could respond, he changed the subject, asking about my wife, my job, anything and everything about my life. And though it seemed casual, I sensed there was a reason behind each question. Like he was piecing together something about me that I wasn't even sure I understood. As night fell, the conversation grew quieter. More introspective. He leaned back, looking around with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I didn't just come by to say hello." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Oh? What else brought you here?" He gave a small, enigmatic smile. "Let's just say, I thought you could use some excitement in your life. And I might have just the thing." A part of me wanted to laugh it off. But something told me he was serious. The way he spoke, the way he looked at me, it felt like he was inviting me into a world I hadn't even realized I was missing. The air grew heavier with unspoken intention. I could feel it in every glance and pause. There was something brewing. An adventure, perhaps. Or maybe something more. And for the first time in a long time, I found myself genuinely curious about what might happen next. And so I leaned forward, caught up in the intrigue, unable to resist the lure of whatever he was about to suggest. As the night unfolded, I couldn't help but notice a certain energy in the room, one that felt both foreign and familiar. My nephew had this uncanny ability to stir up memories and emotions I hadn't revisited in years. It was as though he was peeling back layers of my life that I'd hidden even from myself. A glance. A knowing smile. A lingering pause. They were small gestures, but they felt significant. Loaded. Almost as if they were unspoken questions, daring me to answer. We were deep in conversation, speaking about everything and nothing at all. The quiet hum of the clock in the background was a constant reminder of the hours slipping by. But he seemed completely unaffected by the time. He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze steady. There was a stillness about him, a certain calm confidence that made me feel like I was the only one revealing anything. He studied me as if I was an open book, and part of me felt completely vulnerable under that gaze. "So, Uncle," he began, breaking the heavy silence. "What would you do if you had the chance to relive one day of your life?" I hesitated, completely caught off guard. I'd never really considered it before. My life had been a series of routines, responsibilities, and expectations. Nothing that would inspire great tales or spark the envy of a younger soul. I shrugged, attempting a casual response. "I suppose I'd have to think about it. Most days, they all just blend together after a while." He shook his head, a soft, almost teasing laugh escaping his lips. "You can't tell me there's nothing. Everyone has something, Uncle." The look in his eyes challenged me, prodding me to think harder. There was an edge of impatience, like he was digging for a specific treasure. His question lingered, pulling me back to a time when my life had felt different, to days I hadn't allowed myself to think about in years. But I wasn't about to admit that. "What about you?" I turned the question back on him, hoping to deflect. "You've lived all over, seen more places than I ever will. There must be something in all those adventures." For a moment, he was silent, his expression turning contemplative. "Maybe. But it's not about where you are, is it? It's about the people you're with." His answer caught me off guard, hitting closer to home than I wanted to admit. The air felt charged as we sat there, his words settling in the space between us. His gaze met mine, and there was something in his eyes that felt both intense and unyielding. He wasn't giving me a chance to hide. Not this time. "So," he asked, his voice softer now, yet firm. "What would you do differently?" I swallowed, feeling the tension build. Memories surfaced, unbidden, of dreams I'd once held dear, of paths not taken. But I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. Not to him. Not to anyone. Sometimes it's better to leave the past where it belongs. Or maybe, he countered, his gaze unwavering, it's better to confront it. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken thoughts. His presence was like a mirror, reflecting parts of myself I tried to forget. A reminder of the choices I hadn't made, the dreams I'd let slip away. The room felt too small, the walls closing in, yet I couldn't look away. There was something magnetic about his gaze, an invitation and a challenge, all at once. And then, as if sensing the weight of my thoughts, he leaned back, relaxing into the couch with a sigh. "I'm not trying to pry, Uncle," he said with a wry smile. "Just, sometimes I wonder about things. About people. How they end up where they are." His words felt like a lifeline, a way out of the intensity of the moment. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to relax, though my pulse still thrummed in my veins. "Life has a funny way of working out," I managed, hoping it sounded casual. "Sometimes you don't get a say in where you end up." He tilted his head, studying me with a thoughtful expression. "But you get to choose what you do with it, right?" I wasn't sure how to answer that. Part of me wanted to agree, to nod and say yes, that's how it works. But a larger part of me knew it wasn't that simple. Life had taken me down paths I hadn't anticipated, left me with regrets I couldn't shake. Choices I'd made out of fear, out of obligation. They were still there, haunting me, a constant reminder of all that I'd left behind. Sensing my hesitation, he offered a small smile, one that was both understanding and knowing. "It's okay, Uncle. We don't always have the answers." But his words lingered, gnawing at the corners of my mind. Here he was, bold and fearless, living a life I could only dream of. And here I was, a man in the twilight of his prime, clinging to routines and familiar comforts. His presence felt like a disruption, a welcome, terrifying reminder of the dreams I'd buried long ago. Hours passed, and the conversation grew quieter, more reflective. We spoke of family, of memories, of moments that had defined us in ways we hadn't realized. Until now. He listened intently, nodding and laughing at the right moments, his attention unwavering. But there was something else, something deeper in his eyes. A curiosity. A question he hadn't yet asked. And then, just as I was beginning to feel comfortable, he leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You ever feel like you missed out on something, Uncle?" His question hit me hard. Harder than I cared to admit. I wanted to laugh it off, make a joke, deflect. But the look in his eyes held me captive, forcing me to confront a truth I'd long denied. There were things I'd missed out on. Choices I hadn't made. And now, sitting here with him, those regrets felt sharper, more vivid. "I think we all have our share of regrets," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "But you learn to live with them." He nodded, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Maybe," he said, his voice thoughtful. "But I think it's never too late to change things." For a moment, his words hung in the air, a challenge and a promise, all at once. I felt a thrill, a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. The room felt charged, the silence filled with unspoken possibilities. And then he reached over. His hand rested lightly on my arm, a touch that felt both casual and deliberate. I tensed, caught off guard by the gesture. His hand was warm, steady, and I could feel the weight of it, the familiarity. He didn't say anything, didn't move. He just looked at me with an expression that was both expectant and understanding. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet acceptance that made my pulse race. I tried to laugh it off, to make a joke, but the words caught in my throat. The air between us felt electric, the silence thick with unspoken thoughts. My heart pounded, a wild mixture of anticipation and apprehension. This was uncharted territory, a line I hadn't thought about crossing. And yet, here we were, standing at the edge of something I couldn't quite name. But before I could fully process it, he let go. His hand slipped away, leaving an empty space that felt too large, too significant. He gave me a small, knowing smile, one that was both reassuring and deeply challenging. "Sometimes, Uncle," he murmured, his voice soft yet firm, "you've just got to take a leap." I forced a smile, trying to regain my composure. "Maybe," I replied, though my voice felt hollow, my thoughts scattered. He was right, in a way. Life is about taking chances. About seizing the moments that matter. But could I really do it? Could I step outside my comfort zone and break free from the constraints I'd built around myself? As he settled back, the moment passed, leaving a lingering tension in its wake. But the question remained, echoing in my mind. Had I missed out on something? And if so, was it too late to change that? The clock ticked on, the room quiet once more, but my mind was anything but still. He'd planted a seed of doubt, a spark of curiosity that refused to fade. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. Whatever lay ahead would be unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was strange how the room felt both too quiet and too loud. There was an intensity one hadn't expected, a feeling that everything was shifting in ways I couldn't predict. My nephew, with his thoughtful gaze and relaxed posture, sat across from me, and yet it felt as if he was closer, as though the space between us was shrinking by the second. His presence seemed to challenge every assumption I'd built my life around, every routine I'd come to rely on. I glanced away, trying to distract myself, but my mind kept returning to the same thoughts. He wasn't just my nephew, he was someone with an understanding that felt too deep, a maturity that seemed beyond his years. Every word he'd said that evening replayed in my mind, and each one felt like a question I'd never dared to answer. "You know, Uncle," he said, breaking the silence, "sometimes you don't realize what you need until it's right in front of you." There was something in his voice, calm but purposeful, that made me look up. His eyes held a confidence, an invitation that dared me to step outside my usual boundaries. I tried to brush it off, to remind myself of our family bond, our roles. But the way he looked at me made it hard to keep things in perspective. It was as if he could see through every wall I'd ever put up, and he wasn't turning away. I forced a laugh, hoping to ease the tension. "You're talking like an old philosopher now. Are you sure you're not the one with regrets?" He chuckled, his smile easy yet knowing. "Maybe I am. But I think it's more that I don't want to look back and wonder what could have been." His words hit deeper than I'd expected, and I felt the weight of my own choices pressing down on me. Here he was, unafraid to speak his mind, to express what he wanted. And here I was, a man so used to hiding behind routines and caution that I'd forgotten what it felt like to take a real risk. There was a part of me that envied him, his freedom, his willingness to say things that felt impossible to voice. And then, without another word, he leaned in closer, his eyes locked on mine, his expression unreadable. I felt my pulse quicken, a mixture of nerves and curiosity bubbling to the surface. His gaze was steady, unflinching, and I could feel the tension between us thickening, the silence stretching out in ways that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "Uncle," he murmured, his voice soft but charged with something I couldn't quite name, "sometimes you just have to go for it. Life's too short to hold back." My breath caught, and I found myself unable to look away. His face was closer than it had been before, close enough that I could see every detail, every line of his expression. I knew I should say something, break the moment, return to safe ground. But my mind was blank, the words slipping away as I found myself caught up in the intensity of his gaze. In that moment, something shifted. A barrier between us dissolved, not with words, but with a shared, silent understanding. It wasn't a dramatic collision, but a quiet surrender to a connection that had been building all evening. We moved closer, not with force, but with a natural pull, as if closing a distance that had always existed. The world outside seemed to fade, the room shrinking to just the two of us. It was a hug, a real, heartfelt, all-encompassing embrace, the kind you share with someone when words are not enough. The kind that says everything you're afraid to speak aloud. It was an acknowledgement of a bond that was deeper than just family. It was a moment of pure, unguarded connection. We stood there, wrapped up in each other, letting the emotions wash over us. It was as though we were the only two people in the world who could understand this intense, inexplicable bond. There were no words that could capture the depth of what we were feeling. As we finally pulled away, I saw the same profound realization reflected in his eyes. We knew that what we had discovered was something rare. It was a new chapter in our relationship, a deeper layer of understanding and trust. It wasn't going to be easy to navigate this new dynamic, but I was willing to face whatever came next, knowing that this connection was worth every challenge. We stood at the edge of an uncharted journey, ready to face it together. And as we walked back, side by side, the future felt filled with promise, a story just waiting to be written with the two of us at its heart. The silence between us felt charged, every glance loaded with unspoken words, every step a reminder of the intense connection we'd discovered. The world felt different, more vibrant, more alive. It was as if we had stepped into a new reality, one where the boundaries of our relationship were no longer defined by convention, but by the depth of our bond. In the days that followed, we navigated this new territory with a mix of caution and exhilaration. Each moment spent together felt precious, every conversation and every shared glance was a reaffirmation of the connection that had blossomed between us. We found ourselves drawn to each other in ways that defied simple explanation. One evening, as we sat by the lake, the setting sun casting a warm glow over the water, I turned to him, my heart full. "This feels unreal," I said softly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Like we're living in a dream." He smiled, a gentle, reassuring smile that made everything feel okay. "Maybe it is," he replied, his hand finding mine. "But it's our dream. And I don't want to wake up." We sat there in the fading light, the world around us fading into the background as we lost ourselves in the moment. The connection between us felt undeniable, a bond forged in quiet moments of shared understanding and unspoken feelings. It was a connection that went beyond words, a closeness that felt as natural as breathing. As the days turned into weeks, we continued to explore this new dimension of our relationship, always mindful of the path we were walking, but unable to resist the pull that drew us together. We found comfort in the quiet moments, the stolen glances, and the shared understanding that spoke volumes without ever saying a word. One night, as we sat in the quiet of the shed, the familiar hum of the world outside, he turned to me with a look of quiet determination in his eyes. "I've been thinking a lot about us," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of his thoughts. I nodded, my heart steady for the first time in a long time, ready to listen. His tone was thoughtful, vulnerable. "So have I." He reached out, taking my hand in his. His touch was a steadying presence, firm and sure. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted, his gaze never leaving mine. "But I do know that I want you to be a part of it." The sincerity in his words touched something deep within me, a profound recognition of the unshakable bond that had grown between us. "I feel the same way," I replied, my voice thick with emotion as I squeezed his hand. "This connection we have, it's something special. Something real." We sat in a comfortable silence, the unspoken understanding between us creating a sense of peace that was both grounding and exhilarating. The uncertainty of our situation was completely overshadowed by the certainty of our feelings. It was a silent promise that we would face whatever came next, together. And as we walked this uncharted path, hand in hand, I knew that no matter where our journey led, we would face it with open hearts and unwavering trust in the bond we shared. This was our story, our adventure. With each step we took, we wrote a new chapter, one filled with love, resilience, and an unbreakable connection that would carry us through whatever the future held. The silence in the room seemed heavier now, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like we were both caught in a moment that stretched beyond words. My nephew, with his calm expression and knowing gaze, sat there quietly, as if he understood the weight of what had passed between us and was giving me the space to find my way through it. He shifted slightly, his face softened by the dim light from the single lamp. He didn't seem to want to break the silence, and neither did I. We were both lost in our own thoughts, yet it felt like we were sharing the same breath, the same heartbeat, as though something invisible and strong now connected us. After a long, peaceful pause, he spoke, his voice gentle. "I think people come into our lives for reasons we don't always understand. Sometimes those reasons are simple. And other times, He trailed off, a small smile touching his lips. "They're anything but." I nodded slowly, his words resonating with thoughts I hadn't been able to put into words. He had this way of saying things that felt like answers to questions I'd never asked out loud. In that quiet moment, I found myself wondering if he'd been searching for something, too. If his unexpected visit was as much about his own journey as it was about mine. As we sat there, I felt a strange and wonderful sense of peace wash over me. It was as though the weight of years of regrets and unspoken dreams had finally lifted, replaced by a newfound sense of clarity. I didn't know what the future would hold or where this would lead, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't held back by fear, or caution, or the nagging voice that always told me to play it safe. He looked up at me, his eyes warm and understanding. "You know, Uncle," he said softly, "sometimes you have to let go of everything you thought you knew. Sometimes, the only way forward is to start fresh." There was something in his words, a sense of freedom and release, that made me realize he was absolutely right. Life had always felt like a series of obligations, a list of things I had to do, roles I had to play. But in that moment, I understood that those roles didn't define me. I could choose a different path. One that didn't follow the rules I'd set for myself decades ago. My nephew smiled, sensing the change in my expression, and he reached over, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. There was no need for words. He understood that I was finally ready to step into the unknown, to let go of the expectations I'd held onto for so long. Eventually, he rose, stretching his arms with a casual ease. "I should probably get going," he said, though there was a hint of reluctance in his tone. "It's getting late." I found myself nodding, but the thought of him leaving felt strange, as though we'd only just begun a conversation that was far from over. Still, I knew he was right. He had his life to return to, his own path to follow, and I had mine. But somehow, that didn't feel like an end. It felt like a new beginning. He gathered his things, slinging his bag over his shoulder. But before he reached the door, he paused, turning back to me. With a look that held both a question and a promise. "Uncle," he began, his voice filled with a quiet sincerity that filled the room. "Don't let this moment slip away. Don't go back to the way things were before." His words lingered in the air, a powerful reminder of all the possibilities that now lay ahead. He was offering me a choice, a chance to break free from the routine, to live with a sense of purpose and adventure that I'd long forgotten. And as I looked at him, I realized that this was as much about his journey as it was about mine. He wasn't just here for me, he was here because he was seeking something, too, a connection, a sense of belonging that only family can truly provide. "I won't forget," I promised, the words feeling like a vow. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I meant every single word. He smiled, a look of genuine relief crossing his face. And for a moment, it felt as though we were sharing a silent understanding, a bond so strong it didn't need words to be felt. And then, with a final, confident nod, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the quiet of the house. I found myself standing, walking over to the window, and looking out at the quiet street below. The world looked exactly the same, but something inside me had fundamentally shifted. I felt a calm resolve settle over me, a sense of purpose that had been missing for so long. Life would go on, as it always did. But now, I saw it with new eyes. There were choices to be made. Risks to be taken. And an incredible freedom in finally letting go of the expectations that had held me back. My nephew had shown me that there was more to life than the narrow path I'd been following. That there were other ways to live, ways I'd never dared to consider. In that quiet moment, standing alone, I made a decision. I would not live by anyone else's rules anymore. I would follow my own path. I would seek out the experiences and the connections that truly mattered. It was a small choice. A quiet resolution. But it felt immensely powerful, a first, courageous step toward a life I hadn't allowed myself to dream of. As I finally turned from the window, a profound sense of peace washed over me, a feeling of acceptance and courage that I hadn't known was possible. There was a whole world out there, filled with possibilities I hadn't even begun to imagine. And for the first time, I was truly ready to meet them.